India Confederation of the Blind. Training workshop on the rights of persons with disabilities with particular emphasis on the visually impaired for AICB affiliates in South India. Sponsored by Danish Association of the Blind.
I welcome Mr. RajiveRaturi, the Director Law and Policy, NCPEDP currently, but he has many credits in his talks. He has worked with Human Rights Law Network, Disability Law Initiative. He has worked on international projects on UNCRPD with ABU, Asian Blind Union, and a number of other projects which are too many to count. Your specific topic, Rajiv, and is a dear friend, is UNCRPD interpretation and implications and implementations. You could perhaps speak to us for half an hour, 35 minutes, so that we could take questions. Sorry for starting a bit late. A warm welcome once again. The floor is yours.
So thank you so much, Dr. Anil, Aneja. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak on this important issue on the convention. And I'm grateful to you for this opportunity. Thank you once again, and namaskar to everybody. Dr. Aneja wanted me to speak on the UNCRPD. What are the interpretations and the implications of the UNCRPD? Now, so far we have only been talking about implementation of the CRPD, the various articles of the CRPD. But Dr. Aneja has asked me to speak on something very, very different, something which I had not spoken about earlier. And this is basically on how the convention is to be interpreted and what are the implications of this interpretation which is happening across different countries. So we all know about the UNCRPD. The Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities is an international convention which identifies the rights of persons with disabilities, and at the same time, it places an obligation on the state parties to promote and protect the rights which have been identified in the convention. As of October 2020, almost 182 countries have ratified the convention, and 96 countries have signed the optional protocol. Now, as far as the implementation of the convention is concerned, the convention establishes two mechanisms for implementation of the convention. So the first is the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which has been established to monitor the implementation of the convention by the states. And then we have the Conference of the State Parties, which are basically annual events which are organized for the governments, for the states to come and to monitor the progress of the implementation. What are the challenges which countries are facing to implement the convention? In addition to this, we have the optional protocol, and like I said, about 82 countries, 96 countries have signed the optional protocol. And the optional protocol is basically a mechanism again for implementation, but it gives us the right for individuals to raise a complaint with the CRPD monitoring committee. And at the same time, it also has a special procedure. And if the CRPD committee feels there is a grave and systemic violation happening of rights of people with disabilities, then again, the CRPD committee can act. Now, as far as India is concerned, we have not signed the optional protocol, but I would certainly like to share an example of a recent exercise that we have undertaken. So related to the COVID, I'm a little away from the topic, but I thought I would share this as well. So we are part of an international alliance of movement lawyers and civil society organizations, and we were trying to monitor the deprivation that people with disabilities have faced in COVID, receiving the vaccinations because of COVID, and the kind of lack of therapeutic interventions and health awareness. So we've spoken to about 50, 60 DPOs across the ASEAN region, across Pacific region, South Asia, Africa, the North America, and we are trying to establish the kind of problems that people with disabilities have faced. And apart from the fact there has been no priority in vaccinations, there are issues of not being able to access the application. There have been issues of loss of livelihoods, loss of earning capacity, loss of education. And with the evidence that we have collected, we are going to the CRPD monitoring committee and asking them to institute an inquiry into this grave and systemic deprivation that people with disabilities have faced. So even though we have not signed the protocol, we will be filing this representation on behalf of a country which has signed the optional protocol. But these, like I said, are essentially monitoring and implement kind of issues. Am I audible? Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yes, Rajiv, you're audible.
Okay, thank you.
Your iPhone is left, now you're only from the laptop,
Right.
but you're very audible.
Thank you. So I will now move to the interpretation and implications of the article, which is the core area where I have to speak on. So if you look at Article 34 of the CRPD, it talks about the constitution of a CRPD committee. Now, this is a committee of independent experts, which are nominated by different countries and then they're selected through an electoral process. And the CRPD committee has a membership of about 18 members representing different disabilities, different countries. And like I said, it's an independent body and they're supposed to be monitoring the implementation of the convention. Article 35 of the convention talks about state parties sending reports to the CRPD monitoring committee. They're supposed to send report within 2 years of the ratification and subsequently after every 4 years. So far, about 160 odd countries have filed their reports with the CRPD committee. Now, once a country report is received by the CRPD monitoring committee, they examine the report. They examine the report sent by the civil society organizations, by DPOs, and then a list of issues is prepared. Once the list of issues are prepared, they are communicated to the state party, and then responses are expected from the government on the list of issues. And based on the responses and the final study of the country report, concluding observations are issued by the CRPD monitoring committee. Now, these concluding observations are very, very important documents because apart from the fact that they are monitoring the implementation of the convention, they are also giving an indication to the CRPD that what are the challenges that countries are facing in interpreting the various articles of the convention. And like, the CRPD is actually a very visionary document. It talks about rights, protection of people with disabilities. But the interpretation of the various articles are left to the countries, and depending on their ability of understanding the various articles of the convention, they have different interpretations of the various articles, and consequently, the implications are different of a particular article or different on people with disabilities in different countries. Now, this remains to be a big challenge, but the concluding observations are very important source documents for the CRPD monitoring committee to understand what are the kind of issues which are coming up when it comes to interpreting various articles of the convention. Now, regular reports are supposed to be submitted to the country on what are the kind of political, legislative, policy reforms they have taken to implement the convention. And I did speak about the list of issues and the concluding observations. 164 countries have sent their reports to the CRPD monitoring committee, but I'm not too sure about how many have been monitored so far. This information would be available. I tried to find it, but I was not able to get this information from the OSCHR website. So apart from the concluding observations that the CRPD monitoring committee issues, they also issue general comments on various articles of the convention, based on their understanding of how countries are interpreting various articles of the convention. And these general comments basically explain how the convention has to be interpreted and applied by the state parties in their countries. So far, the committee has issued 7 general comments on various articles. And these general comments are basically to assist countries to prepare their periodical reports when their country reports will be sent to the CRPD monitoring committee. So these 7 general comments have been prepared on Article 7, Article 12 on equal recognition before the law, Article 9 on accessibility, Article 6 on women and girls with disabilities, Article 24 on inclusive education, Article 19 on independent living, Article 5 on equality and non-discrimination, Article 4.3 and 33.3 on participation of DPOs in decision-making processes. So in all, so far, the CRPD monitoring committee has issued 7 general comments. Let's take a look at the example of the general comment on Article 12. This is Article 12 is on equal recognition before the law, which literally means legal capacity of people with disabilities. So on the basis of the initial reports that various countries had sent to the CRPD monitoring committee, they realized that there was a complete misunderstanding of Article 12 of the convention And there was a general lack of understanding that there is a move from substituted decision making to supported decision making. Because the CRPD talks about supported decision making, and we have to move as countries. We have to move from substituted decision making to supported decision making. Now there is a lot of confusion as far as countries are concerned when it comes to this move from substituted decision making to supported decision making. The committee has the various reports that the CRPD monitoring committee adopted. They found that there was a lot of confusion as far as mental capacity and legal capacity are concerned. These two issues have been conflated in most of the country reports, and there is a lack of understanding on what legal capacity is, on what mental capacity is. So the convention tries to clarify this. And for this, even before they came up with the general comments, they had a series of meetings with the national human rights institutions, with various UN committees, UN monitoring agencies, civil society organizations, international DPOs, and then they came up with this draft statement, general comment on Article 14. And this is so. In spreading this article, the CRPD committee has relied a lot on Article 3 of the Convention, which are the general principles of the Convention on equality, non-discrimination, accessibility. So it draws from Article 3 in a very big way. And the general comment says that legal capacity is indispensable for the exercise of civil and political rights. The committee says so. And that the denial of legal capacity has led to their being deprived of their fundamental rights, right to marry, right to have children, etc., etc. The general comment states that legal capacity has basically two prongs. So the first part of the legal capacity of a person is the ability of the person to hold the right. He has to have the capacity to hold the right. And the second part of the legal capacity is basically on the fact that this person with disability must be an actor under the law. He must be able to act on that right which has been given to him by way of his legal capacity. So basically two aspects: legal standing as a person before the law, and then this would include legal standing would mean what? Legal standing means that you have the right to birth certificate, you need to speak, you need to register for an electoral roll, you want to register for a passport. So all this is your right, your personhood of the person with disability. And the second part of the legal capacity is the legal agency of the person, which means his capacity to act on those rights. And normally we find that this legal agency of person with disabilities is something which is under a lot of conflict. So you might have a driving license, you might own a property, but you don't have the right to hire the property or to rent it out. So these are problems that you are being recognized as a person before the law, but you don't have the capacity to act as a person before the law. So this comment is basically clarifying this issue. And so both these strands of legal capacity have to be recognized by countries before they can really work on Article 14 of the Convention. The committee has clarified that mental capacity and legal capacity are two different aspects altogether and should not be conflated. Legal capacity is the ability to hold rights and duties and to exercise those rights by way of the fact that you have legal agency. And mental capacity refers to the decision-making skills of a person, which will vary from person to person, depending on many factors, including social and environmental factors. So these general comments are generally very, very important. And like I said, that 7 general comments have been issued by the CRPD Monitoring Committee so far. Apart from this, the committee is also issuing guidelines on how certain articles have to be implemented. Now, all these documents become very important for us to understand what the articles of the convention really mean. And whilst there is no legal sanctity, if you take these documents to the court, they really don't have much of a legal standing. But if we can use these documents in various petitions, the way we draft the petitions, and we try to inform the honorable judges on what the CRPD committee is trying to talk about these articles, it will help us in a very big way. And if some of these can come as part of the judgments, then I would say that it becomes a case law as far as we are concerned. So we should try to ensure that portions of these general comments are somehow included in the observations of what the judges make when they are hearing a particular case. And if you look at some of the judgments, like the recent judgment of Vishwas Kumar versus the UPSC, Justice Chandrachud has delivered a beautiful judgment as far as reasonable accommodation is concerned. And he says that reasonable accommodation is a right of people with disabilities. And you cannot deny a person reasonable accommodation when it comes to implementing, say, his employment rights. And the judgment further goes on to say that, denial of reasonable accommodation will henceforth be subject to judicial review. So this is a very, very important aspect of the judgment, and which was not there in the law, but Justice Chandrachud has certainly looked at the various comments of the CRPD monitoring committee. And, so the effort has to be made that we try to understand what the general comments are. So thank you. This is what I had to share, and I'll be happy to respond to any questions if you have. Hello? Hello?
Rajiv, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Was I audible? Or?
Yeah, no, you're very audible. I just want to
Thank you.
request you that some of our participants may not be as aware of some important articles, like Article 1, defining disability, 9, accessibility, 24, education, 27, employment. Talk about these. If you could talk about in brief, article, what they talk about.
I could, but these would not be really related to the topic, because I thought I was to speak on how these articles have to be interpreted. So I consciously did not speak about.
But these 3, 4, some participants may not be as aware of the text of CRPD.
Yes, Anil, you could have told that to me, and I would have made it accordingly. But just give me a minute.
Yeah, sure. We don't need a PowerPoint. Just
no, I'm not making a PowerPoint. So the UN's Convention on Rights of People with Disabilities is basically an international document which talks about rights of people with disabilities and places obligations on the state, how the convention has to be implemented by countries. Just give me a minute, please.
Please.
So this convention was signed by India in December 2006 and was ratified in October 2007, and this became an international law in towards the end of 2007 on the 20th ratification by a country. So the system is that once 20 countries have ratified a convention, they become an international law. Now, as far as the Article 1 of the convention is the purpose of the convention, it talks about the purpose of the convention is to promote, and protect the human rights and fundamental freedoms of all people with disabilities, and to promote respect for their equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons with disabilities, and to promote respect for their inherent dignity. So this is the purpose of the convention, which is Article 1. And it then says that what are persons with disabilities? It says that persons with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers creates issues for people with disabilities. So we move away from a medical model of disability to a social model of disability, which says that disability is basically the barriers people face when they interact in spheres of accessibility, communication, the kind of barriers that people face. Article 2 is on definitions, which talks about communication, which includes languages, communication, tactile, multimedia, written, reader, and human and augmentative modes of communication. So communication has a very, very wide definition, and it includes all forms of communication, including that of sign language for deaf people. Language includes spoken, sign language, and non-spoken language as well. Discrimination, any distinction, exclusion, or restriction on the basis of disability which has an effect of nullifying the rights of people with disabilities would be called discrimination, and it can be in any field. It can be social, it can be in any kind of sphere of people with disabilities. But it also talks about reasonable accommodation, and it says that reasonable accommodation is basically accommodations given to people with disabilities so that they can access the right equally with others. But there is a rider to this. It says that provided there is no undue burden of cost involved. So if there is an undue burden of cost involved, then reasonable accommodation will not be provided. But it is, as far as the disability law is concerned, the RPD Act, it talks about reasonable accommodation as a right. That reasonable accommodation has to be given to people with disabilities as a right. And if you deny reasonable accommodation, then this is discrimination and you're subject to legal action. Of course, in the Indian law also, there is this rider that it has to be subject to economic conditions. So Article 3 of the convention is again very, very important because it is on general principles. I did speak to you about this when I was talking about the general comment on Article 12 on legal capacity. So Article 3 has to be read with all the other articles of the convention whenever you're sort of interpreting the particular article. So general principles of the convention include the respect for inherent dignity, individual autonomy, and the freedom to make one's own choices. Now, this is a very, very important part of the principle of the convention, that I have my dignity, I have the inherent right to make my own decisions. Non-discrimination is another very important principle, and this principle of non-discrimination has been woven into all the other articles of the convention, whether it is the article on accessibility, whether it is on education, on employment, on access to health, access to social security. So non-discrimination is a thread which runs through the entire convention. Full and effective
you may not do all the articles, just do 9, 24.
The principles are important. I'll do after that
Okay.
9 and 24.
Okay.
Respect for difference and acceptance of people with disabilities as part of human diversity, equality of opportunities, accessibility. This is again a very, very important article which Anil just spoke about, Article 9. Equality between men and women, respect for evolving capacity of children with disabilities, and the right for children with disabilities to preserve their identities. So Article 4 again is very important, and I'll briefly touch upon that before I go to Article 9 as well, because this is the general obligations of the state. What is the duty of the state? So the state parties are supposed to adopt all legislative and policy decisions to implement the convention. So they have to amend their laws, policies, programs to bring it in harmony with the convention, to take into account the protection of human rights of all people with disabilities in all policies and programs, to refrain from engaging in any practice that is inconsistent with the convention, to take all appropriate measures to eliminate discrimination on the basis of disability, whether it is through a public body or a private enterprise, and to undertake the promotion and development of universally designed goods and services, to provide accessible information to people with disabilities, aids and equipment, including new technology, to promote the training of professionals working in the implementation of the convention. So this is Article 4, and it also talks about how the people with disabilities are to be consulted whenever the convention is to be implemented. I now move to Article 9. Article 9 is on accessibility. Wait. So accessibility basically again is that it talks about that accessibility will be provided to people with disabilities living in urban areas and in rural areas in all, as far as the built environment is concerned, as far as transportation is concerned, as far as information technology and information and communication technology is concerned. So this accessibility provisions are there, very huge. It covers all aspects of accessibility, which includes transport accessibility and physical accessibility. Now, these provisions in the accessibility chapter are very good, and to a very large extent, they have also been found place in our Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, where along with the Chief Commissioner of Disabilities, we are supposed to design accessibility standards for the built environment, for transport services, etc., etc. Then there is this not just transport services, even for the buildings, for built environment, for services, for products which are having universal design, and there is a timeline by which all these features have to be provided. Now, even the matter that we had taken up in the Supreme Court on accessibility, unfortunately, it became a review of the Accessible India campaign, but it certainly does talk about the various targets that the government has taken up to ensure accessibility in the built environment, in the transport services, at railway stations, airports, as far as accessibility of public documents are concerned, as far as sign language interpreters are concerned. So this is all of this is covered in the UNCRPD, and to a very large extent, even in our disability law. Article 24, Adil, if I am right, is on education. So Article 24 is on inclusive education, and the CRPD Monitoring Committee has also prepared a general comment on Article 24 of the Convention on Inclusive Education. And you must have a look at this, because there is a complete shift as far as education is concerned for related to children with disabilities to inclusive education. There is no space for integrated education, and there is no space for special education as far as the convention is concerned. But in India, we do have special schools for the blind, special schools for the deaf. And whilst the convention is very, very clear as far as complete inclusive education, primary education, secondary education, higher education, even adult education, in our disability law, there is scope for special education. And this provision came in primarily because of the strong advocacy taken up by the DPOs of the blind, the NFB and the AICB. And there is a provision for special education, and the choice of education has been left to the child with disability, whether he wants to go to a mainstream school or he wants to go to a special school. If you look at the integrated education method, as far as blind children are concerned, this was being implemented in a lot of, in some parts of the country through NGOs. And it was a very good system of education where blind children were sort of put in mainstream schools, and then remedial classes were being provided to them. But if you look at the law as of now, there is no space for any integrated education as well. We have the National Education Policy, which is a very, very comprehensive document that covers education right from early years to senior life. But again, the National Education Policy has no mention of special schools. So we really don't know where the special school for the blind, the special school for the deaf will eventually end up, because even though the law has some sort of a provision on special schools, the National Education Policy is completely silent. Coupled with the fact that a lot of our special schools do not have any recognition as far as state boards are concerned. Of course, the schools for blind do have state board affiliations, but the schools for the deaf, not very many of them are affiliated, and they don't have any classes beyond class 8. So look at Article 24, the general comments. Also, the CRPD Monitoring Committee is coming up with general comments on the right to work and employment. Now, this would be very important for us, and I would say very important for the All India Confederation of the Blind, because AICB has been doing a lot of litigation as far as employment rights are concerned. And recently, Anil had shared a judgment from Bangalore.
Sorry for the interruption. There is some sound coming at your end, I think. Another extra sound.
Now, can you hear it?
Yeah, now the sound is not there. Right.
Okay, so there is no other sound from my side. Okay. So do look at the general comments which come up as far as the right to work and employment is concerned by the CRPD committee. I was talking about the litigation that the AICB recently did in Bangalore, and I think, if I'm right, also in UP, as far as employment rights of people with disabilities are concerned. And this comment, when it does come across, might be of very big help to you. Anil, I think that should be it.
Yes, Rajiv, that's fine. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. Now we open.
I'm sorry, it was a little disjointed, but
no, it's perfectly. No, it's very fine. Perfectly okay. Yes. So now we open the session for discussion. Any questions that there are on UNCRPD? So please feel free to ask. Rajiv is an expert on that. Please feel free to ask questions.
No, I'm not an expert on the CRPD.
Any questions? Perhaps people are still taking time to absorb the information.
The convention has become quite an old document, so people are quite aware of the convention. The focus now has to be on what Anil says, that how do you interpret the articles, and what are the kind of impact it is happening on people with disabilities.
Yeah. Can you talk about, Rajiv, the India report? Has India given the report? If yes, what kind of report that was? And have the civil society organization given a counter report? How does it work?
So as far as the India country report is concerned, the India country report was given to the CRPD Monitoring Committee. I think in 2019, April, they had invited the DPOs to come up with a list of issues. So I think in April 2019, the CRPD Monitoring Committee had met cross-section of DPOs from India, and where the India country report was discussed, and where the parallel report made by civil society was also presented. And the CRPD committee gave good time to the DPOs who had come in from India, and various issues were put across to the CRPD committee, starting with section 3.3, which talks about non-discrimination in the disability law, which comes with a rider that you can discriminate it, provided there will be no discrimination on the grounds of disability unless it is shown that the impugned action is to serve a legitimate aim. Now, this particular proviso, which is there in section 3.3, non-discrimination, leaves the government with the possibility of discriminating against people with disabilities. So this was one issue that was taken up, and the CRPD monitoring committee in their concluding observations has very clearly mentioned that this proviso has to be removed from 3.3. Then there was the issue of Divyangjan. A lot of TPOs, especially in South India, East India, Northeast of India, are not very happy with the term Divyangjan. And so this also has found a place in the CRPD. In fact, a lot of the issues that were issued, the list of issues that were given by DPOs were included in the report which went to the government. Like the discriminatory laws, on the fact that the National Crime Record Bureau has no record of abuse happening against women and girls with disabilities, the issue of legal capacity, the issue of moving away from institutions, that we need to close down institutions, we need to move towards deinstitutionalization, which the CRPD talks about. So in a way, it was a very good kind of indictment of the country report that India had submitted, and the government was given a lot of issues to be working on. Now,
Rajesh,
hopefully,
sir,
yeah.
I have a question. I'm MuthuSelvi, Vice President.
Yes,
AICB.
yes. How are you, Muthu?
Actually, I understand there is an observation by the monitoring committee saying that our provision in the Indian Constitution
Yes.
needs to be amended. So, is there any action taken by our country on this issue?
As far as the government is concerned, I don't think any action has been taken so far, but there have been actions by DPOs. Again, I would say it's not a unified kind of an action, but like NPRD has been taking up this issue. The Center for Law and Policy Research in Bangalore has been taking up this issue. And I also think the Indian Law Institute, where we have this Dr. Sanjeev, I'm forgetting his name, excuse me for that. They have been taking up, but there is no consolidated effort to sort of lobby with the government for a constitutional amendment. And I think collectively, if we all come together, all DPOs or academic institutions or these resource centers for people with disabilities in universities, I'm sure we would be able to push it across. But it has to be a very, very concerted effort. Thank you, Muthu.
Yes, thank you very much, Rajiv. Any other questions?
No.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Rajiv, for sparing your very valuable time on a Sunday to talk to us about this very important international instrument, which has very serious implications for our RPD Act also and work in the country as far as disability empowerment is concerned. Thank you very much indeed.